So thanks everyone for joining in to the Curry and Pepper Wellness webinar this month. So this month we have a very special guest, Dr. Professor Andrew Knight. He has a lot of credentials, and he's also a professor of animal welfare and ethics and founding director of University of Winchester Center for Animal Welfare and adjunct professor in the School of Environment and Science at Griffith University, Queensland. He's an experienced cat and dog veterinarian. He's also UK, European, and American veterinary specialist in animal welfare. He has around 150 academic and 80 popular publications and an extensive series of informational resources that are available on his social media, on his websites, including the Sustainable Pet Info. And he talks about and shares his work a lot around our companion animals being on vegan diets and the impact on climate change, livestock sector, invasive animal research, and educational animal use, and humane clinical and surgical skills and trainings. And he does a lot for animal welfare issues. He regularly works with animal welfare charities to advocate for animals and is frequently interviewed by media. He's also received 20 awards and research grants for his work. So he's a very special guest. And one of the reasons why my dogs, when I adopted them, they've been vegan. I think I've been following his research work for the last several years. And it was a journey that gave me, like his work gave me a lot of confidence in turning my dogs vegan when I adopted them back in 2012. And he was also kind of the inspiration for me starting my own line of vegan Ayurvedic pet food brand, which we started off back in California in 2014. And now we're kind of operating from India because I moved here with my dogs to India a couple of years ago. And I feel there's a lot more work that needs to happen on this side of the world, where it's kind of catching up with the Western trends. And now where once predominantly we used to have a lot more vegetarian animals, we see now a lot of them now kind of feeding meat. And I see so many of them with several different health issues. So this is kind of in part to be able to help educate our audience here based on science and what science has to say on raising plant-based cats and dogs. And, it's kind of to help also the veterinarians over here kind of see that perspective of side of things. So I'm really grateful to you, Andrew, for joining us tonight and kind of, helping us spread the word on plant-based animals and sharing your research, which is so key and instrumental in this with this aspect, because every time I think we get bombarded with that, like, what does the science say? So I'm hoping this conversation will kind of, shed some light on that aspect and help clear the doubts that people have. So welcome, Andy.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very kind. I'm excited to be talking to an Indian-based audience because the tradition of vegetarianism is so strong in India, and I think it's really important, therefore, that Indian people in particular know about vegetarian and vegan diets for dogs and cats as well. So this is the first time I've had the opportunity to do this, so thank you very much for asking me on.
Thank you and welcome. So Andy, I know you were wanting to be able to share some resources. So I will I'll make you host, and then I think we can get started with the conversation.
Thank you.
So just in case people join as we are conversing, you might have to just hit on the admit button. If you see
I'll look out for it.
Yeah. So you should have access now.
Yes, I do.
So Andy, tell me, like in the veterinary world, it's where predominantly it's always been feeding meat to cats and dogs. What made you kind of think and look at plants as being a source of nutrition and kind of, doing so much work around your research with that aspect? Can you give us some background on that? What inspired you to do that?
Sure. So vegan diets for dogs and cats is an area that I've been interested in for a very long time. I have been following plant-based diet myself for environmental reasons and animal welfare reasons. I think that anybody that's genuinely seriously concerned about environmental impacts needs to be seriously looking at plant-based diets for themselves and also for their pets, actually. So it's something that I've been interested in for probably going back 20 or more years. When I was a veterinarian in clinical practice, mostly around London, I did a lot of research to look at this topic, and I've been interested for a long time, but I wasn't able to seriously focus on it until just a couple of years ago when I finally managed to get some research grants that enabled me to hire assistants to help me at the university with my regular duties of teaching and marking, which freed me up to do a lot of research. So I've been able to research this field much closer to full-time for the last couple of years, and been able to do some really exciting studies giving new results about things like health outcomes of dogs and cats on vegan diets, and also environmental impacts and behavioural implications as well at feeding time.
Wow, that's exciting. Yeah, that's it. The research has been so valuable, because I think we all love our companion animals so much. And here in India, a lot of us also feed our stray community dogs. And there is a huge population of dogs and cats out here, especially if you think about the stray population. And if I just think about the amount of meat that is being fed to them, it just blows my mind, just from an environmental aspect, health aspect. And I know, people always say they need protein and they need meat to survive. So can you tell us, a little bit more about, I know there was a study where you did a comparison between dogs on plant-based diets and dogs on meat-based diets. So can you talk to us a little bit about, what that was and what was the outcome of that? I think that'll help people understand if dogs and cats really need meat or not.
Yes, of course. I'll go ahead and just share a couple of summary slides actually that I have about that, if I can try to bring those up here. Okay, so that particular study has this, sorry, I'm just finding, okay, here we go. So basically we looked at more than 2,500 dogs on these three main dietary groups that you can see here.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
And yep, we looked at dogs that have been on these diets for at least 1 year, and we looked at how healthy all of those dogs were. So we explored these general indicators of health, whether the dogs had needed to see vets an unusually high number of times because that could indicate some kind of illness, whether they needed any kind of medication, whether after being on, say, a vegan diet or another diet, they had to progress to a medical diet. What was the reported assessment of the vet about the health of the dog? What was the opinion of the guardian or the owner about the health of the dog? What percentage of these dogs was unwell? And for those that were unwell, did they suffer from just one health disorder, or was it more than one health disorders? And we also looked at the 22 most common health disorders in dogs, and you can see those here on this chart. And the most common was gastrointestinal problems, followed by skin, coat, and other musculoskeletal disorders, and so on down the list. The probabilities of suffering from one of these disorders was highest for dogs fed conventional meat in 11 out of 22 of these disorders. So for half of them, the most common in dogs fed conventional meat. For dogs fed raw meat, that was most common in 8 out of 22 of these disorders, and the vegan dogs, that was most common in 3 out of 22 of those disorders. So overall, we concluded that the healthiest and least hazardous diet for the dogs was the vegan diets. And of course, they do have to be nutritionally sound vegan diets. But if they are nutritionally sound, if they're formulated to be nutritionally sound, then health outcomes appear to be at least as good, and in fact better in some respects, than dogs fed meat-based diets.
So when you say conventional meat-based diets, do you mean like kibble or?
I just mean cooked commercial meat-based diets, as distinct from raw meat-based diets.
Okay, yeah, just for our audience to kind of get an idea. So I think this is invaluable, right? The fact where we say that dogs need to be on a meat-based diet to be healthy, but research proves otherwise, right? And I just noticed that on that second slide you had there, the impact on the liver, kidney, and epilepsy too, right? That plant-based diets seem to be better for dogs with epilepsy too, right?
Yeah, but that difference was not statistically significant. So it's sort of random sampling variation. There were some differences that were statistically significant. That was not one of them. For this, we've done a follow-up study, and we've actually controlled for differences between the diet groups in age, sex, body condition, and various other factors. And once we've controlled for all of those things, it became even more clear that the healthiest dogs were those fed the vegan diets, actually. We also looked at the differences in the specific health disorders and which ones were statistically significant and which ones were not. And that means that those results were reliable and not simply due to random sampling variation. And there were about 6 diseases that seemed to be significantly less prevalent in dogs that were being fed vegan diets compared to dogs fed conventional meat-based diets, and a smaller number also less common in dogs fed vegan diets compared to raw meat diets. There was only one disorder that seemed to be more common in dogs fed vegan diets, and strangely, that was internal parasites. And it's hard to know why that is, but it may be that people feeding vegan diets are wrongly assuming that their dogs cannot get any internal parasites because they don't eat meat. So they stop treating with worming tablets and things like that. Whereas actually dogs can pick those up from a variety of other sources in the environment, and people do still need to treat for internal parasites, even if feeding a vegan diet. But apart from that, everything was in favor for the vegans. The vegans seem to be significantly healthier in half a dozen of these diseases.
Yeah, that's a great news. Like for especially those who think about, it being the other way around, and like now more and more with dogs getting cancer, they talk about having keto diets, so more meat. So I think this is a great outcome for people who are kind of contemplating what's the science behind feeding plant-based diets. So I think it's clear. So with that, I would like to go on to the next aspect and ask, so I think there was also one other study that you had done, I think that was a while back though, where you had compared like dogs on plant-based diets, and these were like, I think, sprint racing huskies.
This was another study. It was published in British Journal of Nutrition, I think in 2004, on sprint racing Siberian Huskies. Yeah.
Yeah, can you share because these are high performance dogs, and how did they perform on a plant-based diet?
So I will also share where people can find that study. By the way, in the chat column, I've just literally posted a link to the study that I just spoke about. I'm also going to post in my website here, which is sustainablepetfood.info. If you go there and you click upon health, you can get all the dog studies and all of the cat studies in this area. One of the health studies is the one that you just spoke about of sprint racing Siberian Huskies. There are actually now 10 studies of health outcomes in vegan or vegetarian dogs and 2 in cats. The one on Huskies is one of the oldest ones, one of the smallest studies. And it showed that for dogs that were, they had dogs that were split into 2 groups, 6 dogs maintained on a vegetarian diet and 6 on a commercial meat-based diet. They both went through 16 weeks of training and competitive racing, which involves pulling sleds through snow, often for days on end. So it's extreme exercise. And they did that for 10 weeks. They had veterinary examinations and blood tests before, during, and after, and there were no significant differences found between the 2 groups. Both of them showed increased red blood cell counts, and which is a normal adaptation to exercise. So there were dogs in both groups seemed to be becoming more athletic as they went through their training. They were all seemed to be in very good health. There were no differences between the two groups. So I think that shows that dogs exercising at even the highest levels can do very well on a plant-based diet.
That's excellent, because that's another thing we get a lot. Like, we have certain breeds of dogs, they're working dogs, and they need meat. So I think that kind of breaks the myth for people who have those kind of dogs and are looking to feed plant-based diets. So you mentioned when we opened the call, you mentioned about a study about plant-based diets and behavior. So can you shed some light about that? I haven't read that one yet, so I'm really curious about that one.
I'll go and share this PowerPoint again. Just going to see if I can find the relevant slide for this one to summarize this. Here it is. Okay, so we also looked at behavioral outcomes at feeding time for more than 2,300 dogs fed these 3 different diets here. And we looked at 10 different indicators of palatability, how much they liked their meals. And you'll recognize many of these here from your own dogs, whether they quickly approach the food bowl, wag their tail, sniff their food, jump up and down, bark, salivate, and so on. And we did the same thing with cats. We looked at more than 1,100 cats. So these were very big studies. These are by far the biggest studies that have been done in this area. And we had 15 indicators of palatability in cats. And the first thing we did was we looked at how these co-varied with one another. We asked people how likely the animals were to display all of these different behaviors at feeding time. So we looked at which ones co-varied with one another, and were able to identify some as being positive indicators of palatability, how much they like their food, some as being negative indicators, and some were indeterminate. Once we'd identified which ones were positive and which ones were negative, showing whether the animals liked their food or not, we then looked at how those varied across the 3 different dietary groups. And we concluded this, for the dogs, there was no consistent evidence of any difference between the vegan diets and either of the meat-based diets. For the cats, similar result. The diets made little difference, except that cats on vegan diets were licking their food less often. That's a tick for the vegan diets. It's a positive indicator for vegan diets. Cats on conventional diets were leaving more food. That's a cross against the conventional diets, negative indicator for conventional diets. But they're only 2 indicators out of 15. So overall, there was really no difference when you look at how much the animals seem to be enjoying their meals. There have been a number of smaller studies providing similar results. So we said that this concurs with the limited existing studies in the field, and these don't support views that vegan pet food may have reduced palatability and therefore be compromising the welfare of dogs or cats in this manner. So we published that study, and you can see the citation at the bottom of the page there. And I'll probably put a link to where people can find that one as well in the chat column in a moment.
So when you did this particular study on the palatability and the behavior towards like vegan diet, did you, so these were like dogs that were already, you considering were already on vegan diet and compared with dogs that were on a meat-based diet, right? Because what happens is when we work with dogs, when we are transitioning, I feel there's like a little bit of a learning curve because they have to kind of recondition their senses because they've been used to eating a certain kind of food for such a long time. But once they've transitioned over, like, and this is something I've experienced with my dogs too, they absolutely love the plant-based food once it's done. And especially if it's like home cooked, I think they really kind of are excited, as much as excited as, as the other diets as well. So this is just to clarify for our audience. So it's basically you go through a transition process, and when you transition them the right way, and you kind of engage their senses in helping them learn with the new foods, they actually end up learning them so well that they will actually show you what their body needs, over a period of time. So that's been my experience when transitioning them from meat-based diets to like fresh home cooked diets as well. So I just kind of wanted to add that.
And I have some general advice about transitioning, which I've just put the link to that in my chat, in the chat column there. But there are a number of things that you can do to try to make the transition easier. So gradually introducing the new diet over time. You can try gently warming the food, smelly food, certain additives, and various other little tricks as well to help to encourage them to recognize the new diet as being food, and to overcome their almost behavioral addiction in some cases to the old diet with its commercial flavor enhancers and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point you make, because a lot of the commercial diets have palatants added to it. So they're kind of, their brain and nose and everything is conditioned to eating or smelling that.
Yeah.
So what about, like, so this is another thing that I get quite a bit of. So what about bioavailability of plant-based diets compared to meat-based diets, like for both dogs and cats, given that cats are more obligate carnivores. So um, how does that work? Like how bioavailable is the food?
Okay, so I'll just put another link in the chat column to a section on bioavailability for vegan dog food, and I have similar information for cat food on the website there. But essentially, bioavailability mostly refers to digestibility, how much the food stuff is able to be digested, and it's not going to be 100%. It might be 90% or 80%, or some other number. Once it's been digested, they need to be able to travel around the bloodstream and reach the cells and be absorbed into the cells so that they can be used by the body. But mostly bioavailability relates to digestibility. Now, the number of ingredients in both meat-based and vegan pet food is, of course, very large, and there actually isn't bioavailability data for many of those ingredients, but there is limited data, and the data that I've seen demonstrates comparable bioavailability between the meat-based and the plant-based ingredients. Nothing is 100%, but the figures are often in the range of 70s and 80s or higher. Even more important than that, I think, is the health outcomes for the animals. If we see animals, for example, losing weight steadily over time, that could indicate that bioavailability was not sufficient. But we don't see that, actually. We see a large number of studies. There are now 10 studies of vegan or vegetarian diets in dogs and 2 in cats, and more are coming. And all but one of these studies has shown equivalent or superior health outcomes for animals maintained on plant-based diets. So we're not seeing any indication that bioavailability is a problem when we actually look at the health outcomes in the animals.
Yeah, so there was this other study that I was reading, and I'll maybe after the webinar, when I send the recording, I'll share the link. So the study actually said that, cats are able to digest plant proteins even better than dogs. I think it indicated that it had 95% or so of digestibility for plant proteins in cats, which is so different than what we're used to believing, that they kind of, cannot digest and they just need meat, and dogs were pretty close too. So I found that quite interesting.
It was interesting. There has been this new study recently published showing exactly that, and the bioavailability is actually better for, and the digestibility specifically is actually better for the vegan diet.
Oh. So for those of you who have questions and stuff, you can actually post them in the chat window, and we'll go through those questions after we've done the interview. So how about the other question that, we get a lot, and I'm not sure if this was something that was part of one of your studies, is, plant-based foods for both dogs and cats, they need to be supplemented. And some of the supplements may be like synthetic. So how does that impact their overall well-being, and does that have any health impact, given that the plant-based foods have to be supplemented, and does it make the food in any form like less bioavailable?
Yeah, I would start, I think, to address a misperception about meat-based pet food. Conventional meat-based pet food is also very much supplemented. As an example of this, many people are aware of the amino acid taurine that must be supplied within cat food because they can't manufacture taurine from other nutrients, whereas dogs can do that. If there is not enough taurine, cats will suffer from retinal degeneration within the eye, cardiac problems, birth defects, and immune system compromise. So the taurine that occurs within meat actually gets pretty much destroyed by the high temperatures, pressures, and chemical treatments during processing of pet food. So after the processing is finished, the fragile nutrients have often been damaged and lost much of their biological activity. And that refers to things like vitamins and also amino acids such as taurine. Probably not minerals and not macronutrients such as protein content overall, but the more fragile nutrients will be damaged or destroyed by processing. So they need to be added back in after processing. And the source of that is synthetic nutrients. So the most of the taurine that is absorbed by animals in meat-based pet food is from synthetic taurine that's added into the diet after processing. The same synthetic source are added into the plant-based diets as well. So it's important to remember that conventional meat-based diets include meat as well as various plant-based materials. Plant-based materials often comprise around about 50% of meat-based diets, as well as supplements, and there'll be synthetic sources of supplements. Plant-based pet foods include all of the above except for the meat. So they still also include a lot of supplements. If the supplements are not added into either meat-based or plant-based pet foods, then the diet is not likely to be nutritionally sound, or it's not likely to be complete and balanced in all the necessary nutrients. So it certainly is essential, really, that they are added in. And it's not a problem if they're added, it's a problem if they're not added, because the diet's going to be nutritionally incomplete. Raw meat diets do not have supplements added. They're notorious for two problems. One is being nutritionally unsound. They have plenty of protein, but they may well be deficient in calcium and various vitamins and amino acids. They also have high rates of bacterial and other pathogenic contamination in them, including parasite eggs. So there you go. We need to not be concerned about supplements. They're a good thing. They're actually necessary to ensure that diets are nutritionally sound, whether people are feeding meat-based or plant-based diets, frankly.
Yeah, I think that is a very important one because that's something we hear all the time. And I think the other key important takeaway for the audience that is looking to do like a plant-based diet, I think it's really important that it be nutritionally complete, whether you're doing home cooked or whether you're feeding commercial food. So I think I see that a lot where, people just feed like home cooked and it's unsupplemented. And here in India, we also see a lot of vegan commercial food, which is not complete and balanced. So I think it's really important to look out for these things because if you're feeding a commercial food, it has to say that it is nutritionally complete, either based on AFCO guideline or like FEDF or whatever guideline the country follows, which here I think we mostly do AFCO. So that's something to always look out for. And if you're doing home-based cooked meals, then it's important that you add like the additional supplements that are required to make it nutritionally complete. So
Actually, I would just throw in that there have been quite a number of studies looking at whether homemade diets are nutritionally complete, and it seems that very often they're not nutritionally sound, unfortunately, even when people are following recipes, and even when the people preparing the diets are actually nutritional specialists. It's just too easy to get this wrong, and it's too difficult to get this right at home. So I don't recommend that people actually do try this at home. Instead, I recommend that people find a commercial company that's working to good standards and hopefully working with veterinary nutritionists or other nutritional experts to ensure a diet is nutritionally sound and can provide some information about steps that they're taking to ensure nutritional soundness. It should be a red flag if a company has no information and doesn't answer any questions, but if they've got some kind of reassuring information, and also that one of those things should be that they're formulating their diets to meet the nutritional guidelines of authorities such as the US or the European authorities or other regional authorities about the nutrients that need to be included within dog and cat food. So yes, I recommend that people don't try this at home really, because it's too easy to get this wrong, and there are too many studies that show that now.
Yeah, and I think if for those of them who are still attempting the home cooked, I think it's important that they follow the recipe that comes, whether you're using the veggie dog or whether you're using Just Be Kind supplement or the Korean pepper meal balancers. It's important because these recipes are formulated to make sure that they are complete and balanced. So you kind of follow them completely, like, yeah, because
Yeah.
here it's very common that people just feel like home cooked and they don't supplement, so we do end up seeing health issues because of
Yeah.
that as well.
All right. One of the questions in the chat column asks how people can find out if the food they're purchasing is nutritionally complete. The first thing to do is simply check the labeling, check whether it states that it is nutritionally complete and balanced, and potentially complies with nutritional guidelines by one of the authorities. Or sometimes the label will say this product is intended as a treat or a snack. It's not intended as a complete diet. So that's the first thing to do, just see what's written on the packet. The second thing to do is simply check the company. Do they have any information about the steps that they take to ensure nutritional soundness? If they have no information, won't answer questions, then choose another company.
So how about, like we discussed about the palatability, but how about cats? Like, can they thrive on plant-based diets? And I know you kind of mentioned this briefly, that there were a couple of studies that were done, and
Yeah, yeah. They can. There are 2 studies so far of health outcomes in cats that have been published. And again, those are at the same website, sustainablepetfood.info. If you click on health for cats, then you'll find them listed there. They actually show health benefits for cats on vegan diets, and they're the same kind of health benefits that we're seeing for dogs. These fall into 2 groups, really. There are those relating to removing the animal sourced allergens from the diet, resulting in resolution of itchy skin, ear canal problems, gastrointestinal problems. These sorts of issues seem to be less common for cats and dogs on vegan diets, and sometimes the differences are statistically significant. And the second benefit seems to relate to a reduction in excessive nutrition, overnutrition, excessive calories. So we see reduction in animals being overweight or obese, mobility disorders, musculoskeletal problems. So as I say, there are 2 studies in cats that have been published, and those are on the website showing some of those benefits. And we've just had accepted for publication another study in cats, also showing that the cats on the vegan diets are actually healthier than the cats fed meat. And again, these cats have been maintained on their diets for at least 1 year. And again, this is a very large study. So we're talking about more than 1,300 cats in this study. So it's a very large study. So that's just been accepted for publication in an international peer-reviewed journal. It will be entirely open access, so freely available on the internet. And I'm very much hoping that that will be published in the coming weeks, actually. And when
So
it does get published, I'll add it to the website in the same location as all the others.
yeah, because there are a lot of us over here that do feed cats vegan food, and so this is something we get quite often asked.
Yeah.
So how about, like, so this is another thing, right? Like, so people think that feeding meat to our companion animals has no environmental impact, because it's the if they're feeding kibble, it's more like the rendered stuff that's coming in, and even otherwise, those of them who are feeding raw or home cooked are kind of just feeding leftovers. So there's really no impact on the environment. Can you shed some light, because it's alarming from what I have read in the research, and when I see the PFI guidelines that are being now published, and where they're looking to kind of make the shift. Can you talk about that? Because people think it's minuscule. So I just kind of want them to understand like what it does to our planet.
Yeah. Absolutely. And this is a really important issue, and becoming more important as we are increasingly concerned about environmental sustainability and climate change. Based on the best recent studies published in journals such as Nature Food, we know that the food system overall is responsible for about a third of all greenhouse gas emissions globally, and the livestock sector is actually responsible for about 20%. So it's probably the second largest source after energy production, the burning of fossil fuels directly. And a lot of that is due to deforestation to grow feed crops to feed to livestock animals. So there was a study published in 2017 by Ocken from University of California, Berkeley, showed that at least a quarter of all the environmental impacts of the livestock sector are due to pet food. That was in the US. If we apply this 1/4, take the bottom end, say a quarter, it was actually a quarter or more. If we just say a quarter and apply that to the 20% above, then that would mean 5% of all greenhouse gas emissions are due to pet food. So that's an incredible number, really, when we look at the amount of attention given to the entire transportation sector. So all of the aircraft, buses, trains, trucks worldwide, cars worldwide, probably contributes maybe 13.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And there are armies of people working on this issue, trying to decrease those emissions and find more sustainable ways to travel. And if we look at something like the pet food sector, it could be responsible for maybe 5% of emissions. And we ask how many people are working on this. Well, there's myself, there's the occasional other researcher here and there doing bits and pieces, and that's it globally. So it's an incredibly important and neglected area so far. There have been some other studies in this area looking at the ecological paw print of dogs in, there's one study that looked at dogs in Japan, another in China, and another in the Netherlands. And the key point from this is that the dietary ecological paw print of an average sized dog probably equals or exceeds that of an average person in Japan, at least. And of course, a large breed dog would have a greater impact than an average person. A small breed dog or a cat would have a lesser impact because they consume less meat. But this makes the point that an average sized dog could be having as much impact as an average person in a country like Japan, a highly developed country. So these impacts are actually really significant from the pet food sector, and we haven't realized this very much so far. These studies are very new. So what I'm doing, in fact, I've just finished doing, is looking at what would the environmental benefits be if the world's dogs, cats, and also humans all went on to nutritionally sound vegan diets. And I've actually calculated these things. How many additional people could you feed annually using the energy saved? Because most of the food energy that goes into producing meat is actually wasted in the conversion process. How many food animals' lives would be spared each year, and what would the savings be in land use, water use, fossil fuels, pesticides, fertilizers, and greenhouse gases? So I've finished that study, and that is under review, and I hope to publish that in the coming months. And they demonstrate that there are massive savings in all of those areas. If all the world's dogs went vegan, and quite significant savings if all the world's cats, that is the owned cats or the cats of guardians, all went vegan, and of course people as well. So pet food is a really significant part of this picture. We need to be looking at it much more than we have done up until this point.
Yeah, I think that is really important. And I think the last annual PFI report that I was listening to, that kind of also said like the highest emissions, like they had this chart where they shared the emission levels from different kinds of pet food. So one of them was like the meat-based pet food. Then they had like pet food that was made from alternative sources like insects. And then they had pet food that was made from lab-grown meat, and then the plant-based. So the plant-based, even with the supplements, it was like way down, like it was like tiny bit, whereas the others were much larger bars. And I think they're also kind of now beginning to work on the shift. I think they're a little bit more focused on insect protein as the alternative, but I really think that is not the solution either, because we need those critters for our soil and everything else too, right? So if we start with insect-based proteins, we kind of just go back with the same circle that we're kind of having now with meat, right? So
Still killing life.
Yes, and it's interesting to see those results, and they mirror the results that we get when we look at diets for people as well. Even the most impactful plant-based dietary option involving transportation of plants over long distances is less environmentally impactful than the least impactful meat-based diet. And there are quite a number of studies that have looked at that and have calculated those metrics and that show that.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think this was very helpful, Dr. Andrew, because I think knowing the science behind a lot of these things, I think kind of makes people a lot more comfortable, you know. And I think there was a recent study that happened like in March of this year, right, by Bramble Pets in the US, where they kind of tested the fresh food. The study was done on the Bramble Pet fresh food, and they came up with the similar results that you just outlined earlier, where the GI health and a lot of other things turned out to be better for dogs that were on a balanced vegan whole food diet, basically. So I think there is a lot of this trend now in terms of the science coming behind happening. So I think there was one question that was asked where, and this is something a lot of us get asked too, is a lot of these studies are done based on, where you're interviewing the pet owners and, and some parameters are being measured by the veterinarians. So is there like a study that is more in the works where, it's more scientific, as in not just relying on data from pet owners, but more like clinical data kind of that is going to be backed? Is that something in the works or
Yeah, I guess I would say two things in response to that. One is that the study that we did that included the opinions of pet owners also included a range of much more objective data. We asked questions like, has your dog been on any kind of medication or not? Yes or no. Did it need to progress onto a medical diet after being on a vegan diet? Yes or no. So this takes most of the opinion out of the answer. It's pretty factual. We also got the assessments of veterinarians about health status of the animals as well as the owner's opinions. So this is our opinion-based study, but actually based on a lot more. But there are other studies too, which have used clinical examination results and blood test results as well. And there are quite a number of these now. If I'll go ahead and actually share the screen again so I can show you where to find these sorts of things, but there we go. So if you go to the website here, you click on canine studies, you will see that there are 9 studies that have been published so far providing superior or equivalent outcomes for dogs on plant-based diets, and there's only one study down the bottom which provides inferior outcomes. There's also a systematic review that's recently been published, which looks at all of these studies and some other relevant studies as well, which also concluded that, well, there was no overwhelming evidence of adverse effects from the use of these plant-based diets, and there's some evidence of benefits. They referred to some of these data being acquired from Guardians via surveys, but they said these beneficial findings were relatively consistent across several studies and therefore should not be disregarded. And that's true. We keep on seeing the same sets of benefits arising involving lack of exposure to animal-sourced allergens, resulting in better skin condition, resolution of itchy skin, ear canal problems, gastrointestinal problems, and also excessive body weight seems to be less of an issue, less overweight, obesity, musculoskeletal disorders, and so on. So these indicate these animals have a better quality of life. On top of that, they seem to be living longer. The most recent study here by Dodd and colleagues, 2022, that's from Guelph Vet School in Canada, one of the leading vet schools in North America. They looked at nearly 1,200 dogs overall who were feeding these diets for 3 years on average. They also looked at previously owned dogs, and they found that the longevity of the previously owned dogs was about 1.5 years greater when fed vegan diets. So they were living 1.5 years longer. So that's like a person living around about an extra decade at the end of their life. So we're getting these animals living something like the equivalent of an extra decade, but also having a better quality of life as well. Same kind of result was found with the cats. They did a study on cats as well. In this case, the cats on vegan diets looked like they were living longer, but the difference wasn't statistically significant. For the dogs, they looked like they're living longer, and it was statistically significant. So it's differences of sort of degree. But clearly we're getting consistent patterns when looking at all of this sort of data. There you go.
Yeah, no, this is really great, and I can't tell you how grateful I'm to you for all this work that you've been doing, and helping pet parents like us transition over their pets to a sound, nutritionally complete plant-based diet. So there are a lot of questions that we have, so I think we'll just take those. Um, so the first one is by Allison. So do you have resources for transitioning cats from urinary and other common prescription foods?
I would say I don't have any resources specific to prescription diets. The transitioning guidance, I do have general guidance available. I've provided the link up in the chat column to a summary page on my Sustainable Pet Foods site where I do have tips for transitioning. If an animal has a medical condition, then these will be different for different animals. For example, with a urinary problem, it may be important to ensure that enough fluid is flowing through the bladder to help flush out crystals, for example. In this case, you might want to be feeding mostly wet food rather than any dry food because it's got a high water content. So you need to discuss with your veterinarian what are the dietary guidelines for the particular medical condition that are in place, and talk ideally about the alternative diet that you're considering to see how likely the diet is to meet those needs.
Yeah. So just to add to that, Alison, I think like Dr. Andrew said, like I think moisture in the food is really important, and even like if you're doing like a fresh home cooked diet, I don't know, where are you based, Alison? So if you're in the US and if you're using like a VeggieCat supplement or something for home cooked diet, I think they have like a urinary acidifier supplement as well. I think it may be called the VeggieCat Fee or something. So there are, and then things like adding things like cranberry and stuff can also help acidify the urine. So there are definitely alternatives. So here, back with I work more with dogs, but so here with dogs, we do the same thing where we kind of change their diet to help acidify the diet so that, like if they have stew white, then it kind of prevents the formation of that and it helps fight bacterial infection. We also use herbs to kind of support them with this. And I believe totally in the power of plants. Another thing that we use are flower remedies to actually correct and solve the problem at root cause. So there are a lot of different options, but these are very individual specific. I think you need to look at the whole individual as opposed to like just more a generalized approach. So yeah.
And
So
can I
then,
say here that this also speaks to one of the later questions in the chat column, but there was a concern that feeding vegan diets would result in the urine becoming less acidic and more alkaline, and this would cause urinary crystals to form that can come together and form little stones that can block up the urethra where it is small, and that's most of the problem in cats that are male cats, and that can be a very dangerous condition if it occurs. So there was a concern that this was a problem for vegan diets. Fortunately, the most recent studies have shown actually that the rates of urinary disorders are no higher in animals on vegan diets versus meat-based diets. So that initial concern from reporting of a small number of individual cases has not been backed up by large-scale studies that look at statistically significant differences. So fortunately, it seems that we don't need to be concerned about urinary acidification in general anymore, which is really good news. There are not increased rates of lower urinary problems and stones and blockages, which is great.
Yeah, that's great news. So there's this other question from Somik. So Somik basically says dogs also need a B12 supplement, right, in a vegan diet? If yes, any sources suitable for dogs?
Yeah, I would not suggest trying to add your own supplements to diets. I would suggest trying to purchase one that is formulated by a good quality company that's working with nutritional experts to make sure that all the necessary nutrients are included, because there is quite a sizable body of studies looking at homemade diets, even those following recipes, even those prepared by experts, finding pretty consistently that they're often nutritionally unsound. So I think it's too difficult to get this right doing it at home. I don't recommend that people make their own diets and attempt to supplement at home. Instead, I would work with a company that's producing diets to good standards, working with nutritional experts, and let them do the hard work.
Yeah, so it's not just B12. There are other nutrients that are kind of lacking in a plant-based diet that need to be supplemented as well. So if you're feeding a commercial food, there should be no need of any additional B12 supplement because that's already included in it. If the food is complete and balanced, if not, and if you're doing like a home cooked diet, then depending on where you are, like if you're in the US, you have Compassion Circle, the veggie dog supplement, which already includes it. Likewise, in the UK, Dr. Ariel has Just Be Kind. And here in India, we basically use the curry and pepper meal balancer, which includes the B12 and a lot of other nutrients that are required for complete and balanced meals, basically. Um, so the next question is from Manu Srivastava. What are common gotchas and things to look for vegan dog food? Also, what should be the ratio of things like protein, fiber, etc.?
Yeah. As mentioned, I wouldn't suggest that people worry about ratios and supplements themselves. The common gotcha is simply making sure that they're feeding a diet that is nutritionally sound. So checking the labeling, make sure that it does say this diet is a complete diet. It's not intended as a treat or a snack, but it is intended as a complete diet. Hopefully something about being formulated to match nutritional guidelines produced by authorities and from a reputable company that you can have some confidence is producing diets to good standards. Those would be the things to look out for.
Yeah. So, Manu, it's really important, like when you look at, if you're doing the commercial food, that it says that it is nutritionally balanced for whatever life stage of the dog or cat, and the guideline that it is following, whether it's AFCO, FEDF, or another guideline. So that should be on the package of whatever commercial dog food that you are feeding. At a minimum, you want it to be at AFCO. And if you Google AFCO, you will also find what are the nutrient levels and everything that it needs. So I think it's important that the packaging basically say that it follows that guideline, you know. So when discussing these studies, I have often, so I think we addressed this. So this was a question from Ella. So Ella, I think we discussed that one as the first Q&A question. So there's another question from Magdalena. Can you please elaborate on the problem of acidity of vegan diets for cats? And I think this was something you just alluded
Yeah,
to.
I've already addressed that one. Yeah.
So there's another question from her. Is tap water fit for human consumption okay for cats, or is distilled water better? I've seen it recommended, but maybe it's not true.
Yeah, normally tap water would be fine. If it's safe to be consumed by people in that area, wherever it might be, then it should also be fine for cats and dogs.
So how difficult would it be to prepare a balanced plant-based meals for cats at home from scratch? Are there
I think I've
any
addressed that point.
recipes
Yeah, I've
and
addressed that point several
guidelines
times.
that
I have addressed that point several times already. Yeah.
So Dorota, I think, is there a way for an average consumer check if the plant-based food they are purchasing? I think this is something we kind of discussed as well. Is there any legislation? Obviously, it will depend on the country for vegan pet food companies to show that they meet the nutritional needs of the species they are marketing their products to. Do companies tend to conduct their own research?
Yeah, the legislation will vary by country. It is sometimes the case in some regions that pet food needs to meet nutritional standards under regional legislation. And regarding whether companies do their own research, they should be. The ideal would be submitting occasional batches of product to an independent laboratory for nutritional analysis to see whether the nutrients are matching the requirements of nutrients for cats and dogs produced by nutritional authorities. That's pretty expensive to do, but ideally companies will do that sort of thing from time to time. There are many other internal steps that they should be following as well to try to ensure nutritional soundness of their products. We published a study in 2021 of 10 companies producing plant-based pet foods and 19 companies producing meat-based pet foods, looking at all the steps throughout the design, production, storage and shipping processes to see what sort of steps companies were taking to ensure nutritional soundness and good quality, and whether there was a difference for the vegan diets. And overall, the companies were all doing things fairly well. There were some certain areas where things could be improved somewhat. The plant-based companies were doing things slightly better. That might be because this is a more controversial area. They were maybe taking extra trouble to try to ensure their products were nutritionally sound. So I don't think there is a general concern about plant-based diets. If you do studies of large numbers of companies, they seem to be doing things as well or better than those producing meat-based diets.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing, because when we were manufacturing our own line of dog food back in the US, yes, we did. There are like standards that you have to follow to be able to show and even put the label on that says that it's nutritionally complete for whatever guideline you're following. So yeah, and you should always, like, if you're looking at different brands, never hesitate to drop them an email and ask for it, So I think that helps as well. So so this one is from Sarah. In the UK, having spoken to Hound very recently, a vegan dog food brand, they're looking at developing vegan cat food, but they have said it's difficult due to things like taurine. Are you seeing a trend in the market to more vegan dog food now? Are you seeing more brands popping up for cat food? I'm trying to find a brand for my cats in the UK, but struggling.
Okay, I have heard that there are availability problems in some regions of the world. I think the popularity of these diets has grown so fast that it's outstripped the availability in some areas. So I'm sorry to hear that someone is having a problem. I've heard those sorts of reports. Regarding, are there more products becoming available? I mean, I think so. My own experience has been that there used to be companies coming to me every 3 months or so saying they're considering launching a new product. Could they have a chat to me about what research exists in the field and so on? That was a couple of years ago, and more recently it seemed to be every 3 or 4 weeks that is occurring. So the pace seems to have picked up a lot. I do have one relevant slide on this actually, which is pretty interesting to look at. So I'm going to pop that up actually. See if I can just share this. Okay, so this shows the latest figures that I've have come from a market research company just about 2 months ago. Looking at dog food, the vegan dog food sector has been estimated to be worth $14 billion this year, going up to $26 billion in 10 years' time, which is a growth around 7%. But in India, growth is expected to be about 31%, so vastly faster than other regions of the world, perhaps reflecting the increased interest in vegetarian diets in India compared to most other regions of the world. So that's just very exciting. It shows, I think, the rapid rate of growth of certainly vegan dog food, and vegan cat food is also growing, although perhaps there does seem to be more interest in vegan dog food at this stage.
I know it's 7. So do you have 5 more minutes?
Yes, I do.
Let's take a couple more questions. So this one is from Pratiksha. This is the company I get my cat's food from. They say it's vet approved, but it's cooked and no additional supplement is added either. Perfectly made. So Pratiksha, I'm not sure where you are located. So just looking at the website, I don't see anything on their packaging that says that this is nutritionally complete or what guidelines they are following. So not sure, Andrew, if you're familiar with this brand. Seems like
I'm
more.
not. I would be
Yeah.
immediately concerned about anyone that says they don't add supplements because
Yeah.
it's not likely to be nutritionally complete if they're not added. As I said before, raw diets automatically miss certain. If it's a raw meat diet, it's simply not going to have adequate levels of calcium and some other nutrients. If it's a cooked diet, then chances are that the fragile nutrients will be heavily degraded by the processing, the temperatures, pressures, and so on in processing, and need to be replaced afterwards from supplements. So if somebody says they're not using supplements, it suggests that they are supplying a diet that is not nutritionally complete. And indeed, if you look at the website and the packaging, you would be wanting to look for any statements about nutritional completeness and complying with the nutritional guidelines of nutritional authorities. And if those are lacking, then the diet is not sound. And it doesn't mean that problems will occur in the first day or the first week, but in the long term, they will occur as the body depletes its internal levels of nutrient storage.
So
Can I just clarify? I'm in Bangalore, Hetal, and this is a Bangalore-based company, and I've been getting food from them for almost more than a year now. It is on their website that it's vet certified. Plus, I even spoke to my veterinarian and showed them the website and the packaging, everything, and they said they have some certification as well, and they say it's all good. But then now that I've been learning about it, like you're saying, it's obviously cooked off. The nutrients are cooked off. It's cooked food, but they also put like broccoli and pumpkin and things like that to make it nutritionally full. But this is a little concerning, is what I was thinking. Plus, vets here don't really recommend plant-based diet, obviously. And his blood tests are all normal. I got him tested a few months ago. So I was just wondering, because it's something we'll have to do at home because I don't give him any kibble. So it's all like freshly subscribed for me. So I was wondering how to go about that.
yeah, so I think the alternative for you here in India would be like you can try Benevo or Amy cat food, which is nutritionally complete, and they do put that statement on their food. So and that is available over here in India. So I think that would be an alternative. If
Yeah,
you
but
don't,
that's kibble, right? Like that's kibble, that's all
they do
dry
have
food.
wet food.
They
They
do?
have wet food as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Benevo has, I know for sure.
All right. Maybe I can get in touch with you later if it's something that we can create at home itself, then I would prefer to maybe get around that.
Yeah, at the moment, I think we don't have the right blend of supplements for home cooking cat food like we do for dogs.
Got
But
it.
that is something in the works. But I like Andrew also mentioned, I think it's very important that you feed like a nutritionally sound diet. So if you were, you would be adding a lot of different ingredients, which I think would be very hard to home cook then, like with multiple supplements that need to be added.
Got it. Thanks.
So this question is from Famti. What is your opinion on using human supplements on dogs? Any recommendations on omega-3s for
No.
medium-sized dogs?
Yeah, I've answered all the questions about supplements several times, I think, so I would just be repeating myself there. But there's no difference really if the supplement is for humans or for animals, so long as it's a supplement, so long as it's in a formulation that's adequately digestible, and generally they are. Then it comes back to the standard answer, which is it's best not to try to do this at home. It's best to work with a company that is working to high standards and formulating their products to meet nutritional guidelines and has information to confirm that.
And I think the last one, Sherry. So yes, the recording of this webinar will be made available, and we will notify you as soon as it's made available on our website.
Yay.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining in this evening. I think it was an excellent webinar and a lot of learning. So thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate you being here and kind of sharing all this great information with all of us.
No problem. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done. So I guess I will log off and look forward to a link to the recording in due course that I can put out to social media.